right, so get this. Today, we're diving into something kind of out there, wooden satellites.
Wooden satellites.
Yeah, you heard it right. Wood up in space.
Really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. It does. I mean, usually when we think satellites, we think, all that sleek metal stuff. Not exactly something you'd find at your local lumberyard.
Right.
But that's what we're looking at today, this article we have here. Astronauts release wooden satellite from space station.
Interesting.
It's about this thing called LignoSat, apparently the world's first wooden satellite.
First one.
So that's what we're trying to figure out today. Why wood?
Right.
Why would they? And what are the pros and cons, the benefits, the challenges, all that?
It's a good question, a real head scratcher. It really challenges what we think of when we hear space age materials.
For sure. For sure. And the article says they actually just deployed it last month from the International Space Station after sending it up there back in November.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind about LignoSat is that it's a CubeSat, which is like a mini satellite. Super popular for research these days.
Oh, okay.
They're tiny, think like shoebox size, maybe a little bigger, and way cheaper to build and launch than your typical satellite.
So that explains the sat part, I guess. But the wood part is still pretty wild. And the article even mentions they used, get this, traditional Japanese woodworking.
Oh, wow.
No screws, no nails, nothing like that. Just these super intricate joints.
Wow.
And they were picky about the wood, too. Went with Hanaki, something they usually use for sword sheaths.
I've heard of the amazing craftsmanship. Those joints are called sashimono. They use these like perfectly fitted wooden tabs and wedges. So strong and elegant.
Really?
And yeah, the Hanaki wood, that's interesting too. They spent, get this, a whole year testing all kinds of wood samples up on the ISS, wanted to see how they'd handle space before they settled on the Hanaki.
Wow, so they really did their homework.
Yeah.
But why go through all that trouble when you could just use, aluminum or titanium or something?
Well, one of the biggest things is actually how well wood holds up in space.
Really?
Think about it. Down here on Earth, wood rots, it burns because of oxygen and water.
Right.
But up in space, there's none of that. It's a vacuum.
So wait, what makes wood weak down here actually makes it tougher up there?
Exactly. It's a total flip. Something we see as fragile could actually be better than metal in the long run. Really changes how we think about materials for space.
That's amazing. Okay, so it's durable, but the article also mentioned safety, something about space debris.
Yeah, space debris is a big worry these days.
Oh, right.
Every time a satellite comes down, burns up in the atmosphere, it leaves bits and pieces behind, and that's a danger to other spacecraft, even to us down here.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that. So how does wood help with that?
Well, unlike metal, wood burns up completely when it comes back down, so almost no debris, which makes wooden satellites much better for the environment, especially since we're putting more and more stuff up in space.
Makes sense. So it's durable, safe, good for the environment. What else? The article mentioned something about like changing how we think about wood, like we assume it's old-fashioned or something.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the researchers, Professor Murata, he said something like, nobody had ever thought about using wood for rocket science before. Many engineers thought wood was old technology, something like that.
Oh, wow.
So it really makes us question, what materials are right for cutting-edge stuff.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Seems like this could be bigger than just satellites. But before we go there, what about LignoSat itself? What are they hoping to learn from it?
Well, they said LignoSat's got all these sensors on it to keep track of how it's doing over the next 6 months, really putting it to the test.
So, like, what exactly are they looking at? What are the big questions they're trying to answer?
One of the main things is how well the wood handles those super cold temperatures. Space is freezing way colder than anything on Earth. Got to make sure it doesn't get brittle or crack.
I see. I mean, even down here, wood warps and stuff with temperature changes. So I guess up there, it's a whole other ball game.
Yeah, no air, no moisture, changes everything. So they're watching for like how much it expands and contracts, any signs of, damage or stress.
Makes sense. And what about radiation? They mentioned that too. That's a big problem in space, right?
Huge problem for spacecraft, for astronauts, and it can really mess up electronics.
Right.
So they're also seeing if the wood can actually shield against radiation.
Like protect the satellite's insides from all that harmful stuff? Is it just how dense the wood is or what?
It's probably a few things. The density helps, but it might also be the chemicals in the wood itself. Certain elements might absorb or deflect radiation better than others.
Interesting.
It's early days still, but the initial results look good.
That's wild. I mean, to think wood could not only survive up there, but maybe even protect stuff from radiation, that's a whole other level.
It is really shows how much potential these bio-based materials like wood have for space.
Makes you wonder what else is out there, what else we haven't thought of.
Totally, but gotta be realistic too. There are still some hurdles. One thing they're keeping an eye on is how the wood handles all that UV radiation from the sun.
Oh, right.
We know UV rays can damage wood down here over time, so got to figure out if that's a problem in space too.
Good point. And I imagine there are like technical challenges too. Like how do you even build a satellite with woodworking? Seems so different from metal.
Yeah, definitely had to figure some things out. Finding adhesives that could handle the cold and the vacuum, that was a big one. Had to come up with special mixes that wouldn't like release gas or fall apart up there.
So even though it's old school woodworking, they still need modern materials and tech to make it space worthy.
Exactly. It shows you got to bring together different fields, different kinds of expertise to solve these tough problems.
For sure. For sure. Now, the article mentioned something pretty interesting about the future of this whole thing. Something about Elon Musk and maybe banning metal satellites.
Oh, yeah. One of the lead guys, Doi, he said something like, metal satellites might be banned in the future. If we can prove our first wooden satellite works, we want to pitch it to Elon Musk's SpaceX. Pretty bold statement.
Wow, I think there's any chance they'd actually like outlaw metal satellites? Seems kind of extreme.
Hard to say, but with all the worry about space junk, the space industry is definitely feeling the pressure to find better solutions. And like we said, wood burning up completely on re-entry, that's a pretty strong argument.
Yeah. And even if they don't ban metal outright, couldn't wood still be a good alternative, at least for some missions?
Absolutely. Lots of situations where wooden satellites would make a lot of sense. Like short flights where you don't need that super durability, wood could be perfect.
Right. And wood being cheaper than all the usual spacecraft materials, that could open up space to, smaller groups, even countries that are still developing, really make space more accessible.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's pretty exciting to think about all the possibilities.
It is. But they also mentioned growing trees on other planets. Now that one, even, I gotta say, that one sounds a little far out.
I get it, it's a big leap, but the idea of actually growing trees on another planet, it's not totally crazy.
Okay, I'm listening. How would that even work?
Well, first you gotta make the right environment, probably like enclosed habitats, controlled air and light, that kind of thing. But once you've got that, you could maybe grow trees without soil using hydroponics or something like that.
And what's the point of all that? Wouldn't it be easier to just, send building materials from Earth?
Yeah, for short trips maybe, but if we're talking long term, like setting up colonies and stuff, relying on Earth just isn't going to cut it. Too expensive, too hard to keep shipping stuff out there.
So the idea is to make these outposts that can support themselves, get their own resources.
Exactly. And trees would be super valuable for that. Building materials, obviously, but also oxygen, food, maybe even medicines. They could help make other planets more livable, more like home.
That's a pretty amazing vision. Sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does have a futuristic feel, doesn't it? But gotta remember, lots of the tech we have today was once sci-fi too, so who knows what's next.
Good point. So to recap, we've got this satellite made of wood, which turns out to be pretty tough and sustainable up in space. They're running tests on it, and the results could change how we do space exploration, from cutting down on space junk to maybe even having forests on other planets. Pretty mind-blowing.
It's a really cool project, and it makes you think about the future of space and our place in nature in a whole new way.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the big takeaways from our deep dive into wooden satellites?
Yeah, for me, I guess the big thing is don't underestimate the simple stuff. I mean, who knew wood, something we've been using forever, could be the answer to doing space travel the right way.
I'm with you on that. It really shows you got to think outside the box, look beyond the obvious.
Yeah, and that innovation doesn't always mean fancy gadgets and all that. Sometimes it's about taking what we already have and finding new uses for it.
Exactly. And here, going back to basics could totally change how we do space. Less junk, cheaper flights, maybe even forests on other planets. It's a lot to take in.
It really is, and I think it shows. We're starting to realize sustainability matters, not just here, but as we go out there. We can't just keep launching stuff without thinking about what happens next.
You're right. We got to be responsible, take care of space like we try to take care of Earth. And this project shows that being sustainable and pushing the boundaries, they can go together. Absolutely. And I don't know, for me, using wood, something so connected to Earth,
Yeah.
to go out and explore space. There's something kind of beautiful about that, like we're bringing a little piece of home with us.
I like that. Adds another dimension to it. And who knows, maybe someday we'll have whole space stations made of wood. A little bit of warmth and familiarity way out there.
That'd be something. A cozy wooden cabin on Mars surrounded by Martian trees. Not bad.
Not bad at all. And it shows how this tech could change not just what we know about space, but how we experience it.
Well said, well said. So as we wrap up our look at wooden satellites, any final thoughts, a question, something to leave our listeners with?
Well, if wood, something we've had for thousands of years, can be this cutting-edge space material, what else is out there? What other old tech has potential we haven't even thought of? What have we forgotten or overlooked that could solve tomorrow's problems?
Yeah.
Something to chew on.
Definitely. It's a good reminder that the best ideas often come from blending the old with the new, tradition and progress. So keep your eyes open, stay curious. Who knows? The next big thing could be right under our noses.
Exactly. And never underestimate the power of a simple solution.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.